So this is from my first Bane novel, Witchy Eye, first book in the Witchy War series. And this is the reading I did um, generally, including when I went on tour with Christopher Husberg to bookstores in the West. It's not from chapter one, it's actually a chunk out of the kind of second half of chapter two, but it's just the piece that I like to read. And I'm going to go ahead and try and do accents, and I actually haven't read this out loud for a while, so I am certain I will do them badly. Bill arrived at the bridge first, as he'd intended, and breathing through his mouth to keep out the stink. He took extra care moving outside of the city after dark, close as it was to the wild no-man's lands of Texia and the Great Green Wood. New Orleans saw plenty of beast kind even within city limits. Outside city limits and across the river, they were even more common, and some of them were feral. Not that Louisiana needed wild beast kind to be dangerous. Bandits, pirates, robbers, drunk Texians, war bands of the free horse people, and alligators were all possible, even likely, encounters. Bill walked with his hands always on his pistols and his eyes never resting, darting from one Spanish moss-draped oak to the next. Bishop Henri de Bienville Bridge, or Bishop's Bridge, was only a couple of miles west of the city, and crossed the low end of the Mississippi River to connect the highway out of New Orleans with the large Westwego sugar plantations on the south bank of the river. One of the plantations belonged to the bishopric, so it was not pure public spiritedness alone that had driven Bishop de Bienville to construct his famous crossing. The bishops of New Orleans had always been men of wealth and power from the very beginning. The first Bishop de Bienville was a younger son of the Lemoyne family and brother to the Chevalier Lemoyne in his day, whenever exactly that was, perhaps as long as 200 years. Bishops had owned businesses and land and farms and had servants throughout New Orleans' history, and Henri de Bienville had been the richest of them all, a major landowner and benefactor in the city and the surrounding country. Bill knew this about the bishopric and about Saint Henri because everyone in New Orleans knew it. But not until the bishopric had passed into the hands of the Igbo Bishop Ukwu had the Bishop of New Orleans ever been a crime lord and a moneylender. Bill looked at the bridge and wondered whether he ought to think about actually attending church sometime. It might convince the bishop to give him better interest rates. The bridge was enormous, a span of 7 great stone arches shooting across the wide river and creating a passage that could accommodate 4 large wagons abreast. Local oral history was emphatic that Bishop de Bienville had engaged a team of thaumaturgical engineers to build the bridge, and the sheer size of the thing made Bill believe the tale. The same oral history was also convinced that the effort of constructing the bridge had been so huge that it had actually killed the engineers, and de Bienville had buried their bodies inside the bridge's foundations. Around Bishop's Bridge, the Mississippi River created shallow, muddy, stinking wetlands that provided good pickings for fishing birds, but fouled the air. The bridge's first arch began back from the river's edge in a low bluff, to keep the bridge above the swamp and the river itself, even during high flood. This created a plain of sand under the stone that was surrounded by mud and water, but was itself exposed and firm, if not exactly dry, most of the year. It was also hidden from casual observation. The concealed sandbar, known as Smuggler's Shelf, saw a steady stream of traffic for a variety of purposes, none of them completely innocent, and many of them downright nefarious. Croaking frogs and whooping river birds cheered Bill on as he scrambled down the slope onto the shelf. Bang! Bill drove the inevitable clutch of lovers too poor to afford a room from the sandbar with the unanswerable argument of a single pistol shot, fired out over the river. That stopped the birds and frogs, too. He reloaded and checked his other pistol as well, while the couples scattered and the river creatures regained the courage to begin singing to him again, loaded and primed. He didn't fear being reported, even if any of the lovers felt confident enough to do so. He'd be gone by the time any gendarme could get here from the city. And no gendarme would waste his time, anyway. Men killed each other on Smuggler's Shelf, that was a simple fact, and the law didn't very much care. Pistols checked, Bill leaned against the stone to wait. His client Don Sandoval arrived next, with 2 bodyguards on horseback. All 3 had long, rich black perukes, and they wore yellow coats and breeches, but only the Don wore makeup, his cheeks carefully rouged and a neat mustache penciled onto his upper lip. Mutton dressed as lamb. Bill snorted, but he didn't say anything. The two bodyguards were scarred and hard-faced, with misshapen noses and notched ears, and they carried 2 pistols and a long rifle each. One of them was old enough that he might be a veteran of the Spanish War, like Bill, only on the opposite side of the conflict. The other was a relative pup, but in Texia, New Spain, and New Orleans, pups learned to bite at a young age. The Don was a ship-owning trader, soft and weak, and Bill didn't wonder that he would hire someone else to avenge the insult inflicted by the young frog who had climbed between his mistress's sheets. He was a bit perplexed that Don Sandoval hadn't simply had one of his own bodyguards do the job, but maybe the Don overestimated the Frenchman's skill and preferred not to risk his own man. Maybe the Don didn't want his men to bear the brunt of any repercussions if some gendarme decided to take offense to the killing. In any case, Bill needed the cash. "Will you watch then, sir?" Bill bowed slightly as the Spaniards dismounted. "She's a good night for a duel. We will watch it from over there," Don Sandoval told him, indicating a deep patch of shadow beside the bridge. "Very good, sir." Bill noted the spot mentally. Odd creature, this Dago with odd notions, he seemed to want to redeem his honor anonymously, which did not at all accord with Bill's ideas of how things should be done. But the Spaniard would get what he wanted as long as the Spaniard was paying gold. Bill had learned long ago not to care too much about the strange notions of other men, so long as he got paid. 2 louis after the shots were fired. Bill willed his employer to remember the bonus he had offered. Don Sandoval nodded. "And a further 10, senor, if you kill the young man." Bill nodded too, keeping his comportment professional. 20 louis would see him out of debt and nicely in cash for a while. Too bad for the young Frenchman. Maybe his friends would learn a valuable lesson about rich men's mistresses, and then the boy's death wouldn't be a total waste. The Spaniards took their horses with them and hid. The sun sank. Bill paced the shelf in the gloom and waited, listening to the placid gurgle of the river around the stanchions of Bishop's Bridge and the harmonies of the frogs and the birds. The night air was getting colder, and it smelled bad. Bill's mind wandered to thoughts of Long Cathy and a wish he wasn't still bound to a family in John's Land he hadn't seen in 15 years. He felt bad for that wish, and he focused his mind on Sally. Sally was a good woman, worth far more to him even than the very good dowry she had brought to the marriage. She'd given him 2 sons and 2 daughters, and of those, only the one boy had died in infancy, too small and weak to even get a name before he expired in her arms, mewling like a cat. The girls had both lived, and Charles. Hell, Charles might even have his commission by now. Bill hoped it was in the service of the Earl of John's Land. However insane the Earl might be, he was better than Thomas Penn. And he had sworn he would not vent his anger at Bill upon Bill's family. 3 Frenchmen arrived. They clattered down the slope, crashed through a break of river reeds, and waded into the darkness under Bishop's Bridge in the tight yellow embrace of a lantern. "Ribbit!" Bill called in greeting. The Frenchmen were young and rich. None of them was wearing the makeup that seemed mandatory in salon society, and that they had been wearing the night before. Bill's opponent, he knew him by his jaw, bruised and puffy, looked the richest of all in a silk shirt and elaborately brocaded waistcoat and jacket, but all 3 dressed like dandies, with plain black cloaks thrown over the top. "Mr. Lee!" cried the young lover. "I am here!" His English was ridiculous, but it struck Bill suddenly and painfully that this young man whom he was about to murder was probably the same age as Bill's own son. Forget fallen, he thought, it's a damned world. Bill swallowed back thoughts of his boy, nodded a salute, and approached the foreign dandies. "You are here indeed, Monsieur the Frog. Shall we mark off 10 paces? The 3 men conferred in French, and then one of the friends, shorter and with a round, plump face, spoke. His English was clear, though notably accented. "We believe the Code Duello entitles my master, my friend, to know his offense, and to apologize if he wishes. We acknowledge that we have taken the ground, which in principle precludes any apology until shots have been fired, but my friend informs me that he does not understand why he has been challenged." Bill wasn't accustomed anymore to transacting violence with gentlemen, and suddenly he wished he had employed more regular process. Well, this was New Orleans, not Richmond or Philadelphia or Paris, and the young monsieur didn't seem to be standing too unreasonably on his rights. "Tell your friend, sir, that his offense was to make free with Miss Lefebvre." That much was true. "Miss Lefebvre is my mistress." Bill regretted this lie, but he needed the louis. Miss Lefebvre was a young actress well known in New Orleans, particularly for her work in stage comedies. Bill had seen her in something called L'École des Femmes, which he understood to mean the school for wives. The play had been all in French and considerably less exciting than Bill had been led by the title to believe. She was also the mistress of Bill's Dago employer. Bill's claim to be the actress's beau occasioned another three-sided flurry of French, and then the plump-faced man spoke again. My master is surprised that you are so intimate with Miss Lefebvre. He acknowledges the insult and regrets that it places him at odds with you. Nevertheless, he cannot apologize, as he is in love with the lady. Bill sighed. He needed to kill the Frenchman quickly. He was starting to like the lad, and that would throw off his aim. 10 paces, then. Your friend fires first, as I expect you know. The reek of the swamp was even thicker than usual. The third Frenchman, the lantern holder, sallow-complected and small, rushed forward. Please, sir, I beg you, this is not just any young man. His father. Arrêtez-vous! Shouted the challenged young man. Bill thought that meant stop. The sallow-faced friend fell silent, and both he and the interpreter looked at their feet. Bill hesitated, then decided the brave young man deserved fair warning. Tell your friend that I'll be shooting to kill. If it were Charles in such a duel, rather than the Frenchman, Bill would want the other fellow to warn his son. Bill laid his coat on the ground carefully and took both his long pistols in hand. The challenged Frenchman armed himself similarly, and Bill noticed that his pistols were a pair of very expensive flintlocks, reflecting the lantern's light with elaborate gold and silver inlays. The guns were long and light, the pistols of a marksman. Sallow took the lantern off to the side and held it high. Both men checked their weapons. Bill's were dry, loaded and primed. Commencez-vous? Sallow said, and then started counting. 1, 2, 3. Bill marched. He heard the young man's boots behind him as they paced off 10 crunching steps each in the wet sand. Might the young Frenchman be more dangerous than Bill had imagined? He had impressive pistols, and he seemed to know the code duello, or at least Plump-Face did. Bill glanced as he paced at the shadows where the Spaniards were hiding and saw nothing. Even those yellow coats they wore were concealed by the deep darkness under Bishop's Bridge. Bill reached his 10 paces and turned. He let both hands hang at his side. Maybe the Frenchman would kill him. Would that really be so bad? Death would come for him somewhere, and Bill had always expected it to be violent when it came. He lived through 4 years of the Spanish War, with battles all over Texas and the Cotton League, and of course the Siege of Mobile. He'd been young then, just a boy. He'd lived through 10 years of riding with the imperial consort, putting down road agents, Comanche slavers, beast-kind riots, and rapacious banks. He'd lived by the sword, and he expected to die by it, too, just as Shakespeare said, or was it Jesus? Why couldn't the Frenchman be the one to pull the trigger? Would Bill really miss this dishonorable ruffian's life? And even if he won, if he killed this Frenchman, repaid his debts and lived, would he ever return to Johnston? That he might return on the Earl's death had been a constant prayer for 15 years. He hoped the old man would finally die, and the new Earl would revoke his sentence of banishment. But the old man seemed to continue unnaturally, as if he had decided to live forever, just to spite William Lee. If Bill died, though, he would never have the chance to see his son Charles as a grown man. The Frenchman raised his pistol to take aim, and Bill saw that death would not come for him tonight. The young man's arm wobbled as he pointed his gun. He might know how to shoot, might even be a good shot, but he had never before shot at a living man. Bill sighed. He hoped that if his son were in such a duel, he would at least be able to aim straight. Bang! The sound of the explosion echoed across the river and bounced back from the underside of the bridge, and the Frenchman lowered his gun. As bad a shot as the Frenchman was, Bill thought, his willingness to engage in the duel to defend his lady's honor was that much more courageous. And courage was a dangerous, dangerous virtue to possess. Goodbye, sir, Bill murmured inaudibly to the young Frenchman. I'll be proud to be your father. Then he took steady aim, pulled the trigger of his long pistol, and blew the young man to kingdom come.